Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Simon, I'm a professional mediator and I provide tools and resources for dealing with conflict. And in the video today, I'm going to be talking about some of the next steps that we could take for dealing with conflict, getting ready in the morning. In the previous video that I recorded, which I published yesterday, I actually was talking about some of the ways that we can set goals when we're dealing with conflict. So I went through these different options on the screen there in terms of the steps that you could take. I'll just remove that because that's covered up all of the useful information. The steps that you could take when you're dealing with conflict and some of the strategies that can be helpful for clarifying goals. And I explained a particular framework. This is what it was, just very briefly. Writing a list of what's important, identifying the obvious priorities, brainstorming options, letting go of what you need to, as in triaging the different problems that you're dealing with or the different desired states, the goals that you're aiming for. And then we come up with a plan. So in the previous video, I talked about a particular example looking at, it's actually based on my son and some of the conflict that we were dealing with a couple of years ago. Every single day before school, we were having these massive arguments in the household, and I was telling him that he needs to get ready and brush his teeth. And I've written in the case study that it was 10 times. I literally need to ask him, but honestly, in some days it was probably a lot more than 10 times. And I would lose it. And I really do look back on my behavior at that time and think that, gosh, there were many days when I just didn't manage it very well. Now, on those days, there was probably something else going on for me. I hadn't had much sleep, or I don't know, there was some other issue that I was dealing with at the time or something. And it's not how I wanted him to remember me. I don't think the way that I responded was best for him and his development and what he needs from me as his dad. And I don't think ultimately it left me feeling good. I felt guilty and I felt really crap after I'd yelled at him and blown my top. And so what I thought would be helpful today is to go through some of those steps that would be involved in a plan. And I'm actually going to talk about this case study again. So I'll briefly re-go over it if you didn't see the previous video. And then I'll talk about some of the different lenses that I use to understand the issues with my son. And we'll use this case study here as a way to do that. And you might be able to then take some of those options and some of those ideas and potentially use them yourself, or if you're trying to support your partner or somebody else to get a better structure, a better sense of control around morning routines and that kind of thing. So let's have a look at the case study, and then we can look through some of those specific tools that we can use to analyze it. So every day lately has been a battle to get my 6-year-old son ready for school. I need to ask him at least 10 times to brush his teeth and put his socks on. 6-year-old son, the issue is getting ready for school. We don't have much detail around how long does this conflict go on for? Is it a 2-hour battle every morning or a 5-minute incident? What's happening here? It sounds like the needing to ask 10 times to brush teeth and put socks on is part of a pattern, but there's a lot of information that's missing here, isn't there, in terms of what are the other elements that's contributing to this? I know my son, and I do know him in real life, and I love him. He's a wonderful little kid. So why is he not listening to me? If I am a fully rational and reasonable dad and I've given him a request that doesn't have any problems, why isn't he just doing what I'm asking him to do? It's a little bit of a mystery, isn't it? And I think for me, that's one of the helpful ways that I can approach this is that's curious. I wonder what's contributing here, because that will give me information about how to deal with it. But if instead I come at it from a labeling type of way of you're always doing this or this is ridiculous or whatever else it might be, we tend to get a very different response back, don't we? So let's continue. He's constantly getting distracted by irresistible factors like Pokemon cards. The weird thing is, he even has the gall to talk about me and make conversation. That is weird, isn't it? If he's deliberately doing the wrong thing, why would he then engage me in conversation about the thing that he's doing that's wrong? It's like a criminal stopping to chat with the person that they're robbing from about, what a lovely haul they're getting this time of year. And they were surprised to see so much cash in their wallet. And why did they have so much cash in their wallet? They were just curious because they don't normally get to rob somebody for this much money or something like that. It's like my son's telling me, Dad, look at this card. Dad, this one does 200 attack or something. And I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, I do not care. And actually, as I reflect, that might be something that's causing the level of frustration that me or the parent in the case study is dealing with here. He's oblivious to the fact that I'm standing there fuming with my hands on my hips, angrily reminding him again to brush his teeth. So I would immediately probably put this down to a capacity issue versus an intention issue or a motivation issue. But what do you think? Like, do you think he's deliberately doing it? Would you describe this as him needing extra support to do what he needs to do, or something about you needing to convince him to do what he needs to do? Whichever side we land there would affect the strategy that we decide to use to deal with it, wouldn't it? So let's continue. A few times a week, all of this ends in a blow-up. I yell, if he doesn't brush his teeth right now, that he will lose his TV this afternoon. So this is the threat that comes in. He usually cries or gets angry, begrudgingly brushes his teeth. To be honest, I think this often leads to some type of revenge. Even though he begrudgingly does what I want him to do in the short term, it's likely that he'll find a way to get back at me at some stage, or, ask for $1 that he can take to school for the canteen or something, because he knows that he can leverage a little bit of the guilt that I'm feeling. So then we walk to school with everyone grumpy, him being upset and distressed, me feeling like he's brought it on himself. Frequently, when I reflect, I think that I handled the situation really poorly. We can really get into that self-flagellation, can't we? Beating ourselves up about what we did, and I overreacted, why am I such a whatever, what's the label that you put on yourself? I'd be curious to hear about that. And for me, I think the challenge is that we don't want to get stuck in the past and the problem. And in the previous video, I talked about Terry O'Connell's questions that he uses in restorative justice. For my reframing, it's what happened, what were you thinking at the time, what have you been thinking about since, and what needs to happen to make it right. And so for me, when I'm getting stuck in that I'm such an idiot, why did I mess this up kind of situation, those are the 4 questions that I find helpful. What happened? I'll just write them down so that you can see there. What were you thinking at the time? What have you been thinking about since? And something about the next steps, like the phrase that he used roughly was what needs to happen to make it right. For you, it might be more like what needs to happen now. So it's next steps. I don't mind that phrasing of, though, like what needs to happen to make it right. It does kind of imply like, should I apologize, or what needs to happen here? So for me, when I went through the video yesterday, these were the goals that I came up with as I explained the framework that we can use for clarifying goals in conflict. We need to get ready before 8:30 or we'll be late. Like that was ultimately the non-negotiable, like that was the bottom line that we needed to make sure that we met, or else we were going to be late. Like just practically speaking, that was it. For me, that's kind of helpful to know, like this is the point where I'm not prepared to negotiate beyond, if you know what I mean. So if I'm stressed and it's 7:50 and I've asked him 4 times to brush his teeth, I might need to remind myself that I've still got 40 minutes before we need to go. Whereas if it's 8:20, then it's more of an urgent situation. But it gives me a little bit of a lens to calibrate my reaction as opposed to just blowing my top. I need to help him develop awareness and responsibility. So that's a lovely one, isn't it? Like, what are the things that I want to teach him? I want to have a good relationship with him. And, for me, that means that it's positive and that we trust each other and that we listen to each other and that there's a level of mutual respect. For me, by the way, that is part of it, is that I do want to also give him a level of autonomy. I'm not a very micromanaging kind of parent. I'm probably not capable of doing that because I'm not organized enough myself. I want him to feel comfortable with me. I want him to respect me. I want to be a good role model. So however I decide to go about dealing with this situation, that would be another of those factors that I would consider. I want him to feel supported. I want to set him up for a good day to concentrate at school. Like I want him to learn as much as he can. I want to set myself up for a good day to be productive at work. And ultimately, I don't particularly want to be dealing with a high level of stress. I don't like dealing with stress. I find stress very stressful. And so if I'm going to be dealing with difficult things at work, then the last thing I want is to add to it by, all of a sudden ramping up my nervous system before I've even begun the stuff that I have to do for the day. Does any of that resonate with you? Like if you were to go through a similar exercise and think about what are the different factors that you need to focus on, would it be the same thing or something slightly different? So we could also then think about personality types and conflict. And I do find this is still quite helpful, even when we're dealing with children to some extent. It's not about categorizing or pigeonholing people, but really looking for the broad trends or broad themes that you might notice. So this is a summary document that I've developed based on a particular personality profile called Insight Discovery. And so all of these lenses, there's just goods and bads. There's no right and wrong. There's DISC and Myers-Briggs and Big Five and millions of other different personality types. For me, it's just what's going to resonate with him. I don't want to make the mistake of assuming that everyone thinks the way that I do. So where's he up to? What's his priority at the moment? And when I think about my son, he's got a real mix of the sunshine yellow kind of characteristics. He wants me to think that he's good. He really likes discussion. He's talking constantly. He likes it when I ask him, how are you going to do this? What do you want to do first, mate? Do your socks or brush your teeth? I guess if you're upstairs, you could brush your teeth now. And then if you take your socks down, then you won't have to come back up. But he likes me to involve him in that sort of planning, He doesn't like it when I just tell him, you need to do this and this and this. Whereas for other kids, like in the red category, they might not mind a list of 3 things they have to do if they can then get 10 minutes of extra iPad or something. So my son's sometimes in the yellow, so I want to engage him, use discussion-based tactics, ask for his input, that kind of thing. And when I'm giving him feedback, it would be around that he wants to be admired. And then the green part of him, which is the other part I think for him, is this, like he likes harmony. He likes casual and conforming. He doesn't like it when I go into angry dad mode. The look on my face, the tone of voice when I'm angry upsets him. He likes it when I'm pleasant. He doesn't like it when there's confrontation. So for me, I then need to really lean into, for example, like positive reinforcement. Like once he's done one thing well, saying to him, thanks, mate, I really appreciate it. Gosh, look, we've still got 15 minutes before we need to go. That's made such a difference that you were able to get through a few of those things early. Thank you. Like, I really appreciate it. Or I could say something like, wow, I can't believe you got your teeth brushed already. Like, you are developing so much maturity. I'm really proud of you. Like, these are the 2 things that's going to resonate with the yellow and the green. Whereas if they were the kind of the kid that wants the list and they want to manage themselves largely, then you might just suggest to them a different kind of positive reinforcement. Or the red might just be interested in the results, like how much extra TV are they going to get or something like that. The next thing that we need to consider are what are called conflict modes. These are developed by a couple of psychologists, Thomas and Kilman, and they more or less encapsulate the 5 different options that we've got for responding to any conflict situation. So depending on the day, I might take any of these 5 different options for dealing with my son. A competing approach would be to stand firm and to say, look, if you don't do it within 5 minutes, this is the punishment or something like that. Like, just stick to my guns, be very assertive. I could take a collaborative approach of sitting down with him and developing a dot point list that he's going to go through in the morning or something like that. I could compromise and say, look, if you'll brush your teeth now, I'll help you put your socks on later, something like that, like halving the amount of tasks that he needs to do. I could take an accommodating kind of approach, which is just to say, look, come on, I'll help you do it all. Or, I don't know, crossing some of the tasks off the to-do list, like you don't need to do your drum practice, or I'll pack your bag for you instead. Or maybe it's just avoiding. Like if it's 7:50 and he hasn't done it, maybe in that little moment I don't actually need to go and yell at him. Maybe I can just let it go, or in a very subtle way remind him, like put that list of tasks that he agreed to do back on the bench so that he notices it when he comes in to get something to eat shortly. So I need to really consider which of those different options are going to be suitable depending on the situation that I'm dealing with. And this is where we can really begin to respond rather than react, if that makes sense. So all of this, the way that it plays out, it's not a single interaction that we have together. Like, especially when we're talking about a family member's relationship, it's ongoing. And for me, as I pause and reflect on a particular fight that we had or argument, the next layer that I need to consider is, the bigger picture. what is this part of, broadly speaking? Like, when I yell and act like this, what effect does it tend to have on people? Whoops, don't know what I did then. I must have used some gesture that's ejected me out. I'll go back to where I was. I beg your pardon. So where are we up to in terms of this interactive different cycle that's going on between us? And so as I begin to look at those different strategies, like taking a competing or collaborating or accommodating approach, I also don't need to resolve it all today. Or I could take a competing approach for now, but tomorrow look at collaborating because we've got more time, so we can go through and write the dot point list. Whereas today, because it's urgent, I might need to just take that more directive kind of approach. And I also need to be aware of the fact that, look, it's not just this interaction that's affecting both of us. My level of stress, my perception literally will be affected by the other conflicts that's going on for me. If I've had a big argument with my wife that morning, then when I go in to deal with my son, I'm not thinking in the same way. I'm not as rational. I'm not as logical. I'm quicker to react. My perception tends to adjust and catastrophize problems and all this kind of thing. So it's not his fault. And whatever the reaction is that I get back from him, it's not all about me. You know, a lot of us aspire to maybe not take conflict as personally. And once we can understand that this is actually the way that conflict plays out, it begins to help us differentiate from whatever the reaction is that we're getting from the other person and maybe not take as much ownership of that. And then for me, ultimately, this is the picture that sums it up, you know. As I think about the times when I've yelled at my son and been unnecessarily cruel or jumped the gun and assumed that he was doing it deliberately and he didn't realize, or he had tried, but there was a problem. And so I'm yelling at him, but what did I expect him to do? You know what I mean? There was no more toothpaste and he tried to come and find me, but I'd also told him not to bother me or something like that. Like this again, it's this process of realizing that what we crave, honestly, I think our fundamental goal, and for my son as well, it's connection. It's feeling like, you know, we're still okay with one another. So however I decide to go about dealing with the disciplinary side of things, I don't want to lose sight of, you know, that compassionate warmth and forgiveness and, I don't know, empathy and understanding and all of that kind of stuff. We need to balance, I suppose, wisdom with compassion, but we don't want to lose sight of the compassionate stuff, even when we're deciding to be more assertive or hold the line more or something like that. What do you think? Has that been helpful for you, for me explaining some of those different options for dealing with that type of family conflict about morning routines? And what would you do? Would you do something slightly different? Maybe there's a particular strategy that you've used that you found really works for you. I'd very much appreciate if you'd be willing to share it in the comments. If it's been useful, please consider pressing like. If you want more additional resources for dealing with conflict, please consider subscribing. Otherwise, I'll hopefully see you again in a future video. Thank you and bye for now.